FIAN International is a human rights organization, as you know, and we basically work to support social movements that are struggling against violations of the right to food, and especially the violations of the right to feed oneself, strongly linked to the access to different types of resources, not only land, but water, seeds, and other resources like the territory and such, including the cultural, social aspects of life that are not usually included in the land issue. We have been working for 25 years, and in these 25 years we documented 450 cases in more than 60 countries of violations of the right to food. And we support this movement to try to negotiate the regaining of their right to feed themselves, either through access to resources, land, or access to resources like income, or even programs, social programs. 80% of the cases we documented over the last 25 years were related to access to territory, access to resources, showing that the problem of access to land is not a new problem, but it's been a long problem, and it's part of structural nature of the model that we have in the world. We lately have been developing our work basically in the denunciation of the model as such, both urban and industrial, as the causes for the violations. Some people in the UN like to say that our governments, when they meet together, they used to say, accuse each other of lack of political will. FIAN has been developing the theory that it's not lack of political will, it's too much will in the wrong direction that has been causing the problems in the world. You know, they work together. The poor governments in the poor countries, the governments in the poor countries, and the big governments in the big countries, and the private sector have an agenda. And let's not say that they don't have one. They do have an agenda, and it's clear. It doesn't involve the poor, it doesn't involve the landless, it doesn't involve the people who work in the countries. It involves their own interests. So we have not to be naive here to believe that a multi-stakeholder process alone is possible. If we don't organize the people with ourselves, we are not able to change the situation and the correlation of power. Because the multi-stakeholders many times do not involve the people who have no rights to eat steaks, or the relevant, the separate thing in the vegetarian world would be the vegetable proteins or whatever. Stakeholders are only people who can really be part of the... It's like you go into a soccer game. No, let's put an American football game, where you put one side is a team of young kids, all dressed up in those beautiful uniforms of baby without uniforms, and then on the other side you have this mega hormone people with 200 kilograms, and then you say the rules of the game are fair. You have a level field, now let's play, and let's see what happens. And we know the result when we have this kind of games. And that's exactly the kind of games that many times happen in this multi-stakeholder tables, where good governance happens, good rules are in place, but the power relations are never checked to see who is sitting on the table and how much money is rolling out under the table. So and I would like to wrap up because I think, there is so much to be said, but I would like to say a few words about a few of the lines of our work. And the first thing is that we understand that the present process is not a new crisis. The 2007, 2008 is not a new crisis. In 1974, the United Nations met to discuss the food crisis in 1974. If you look at the causes of the crisis in 1974, they are the same causes of the crisis today. So there is not, and the 1 billion people who have been hungry over the last 30, 40 years chronically, the crisis has always been there for them. What happened now? What is so different? What is so different, basically, is that the problem hit the urban sector. It hit the urban sector, and where the people have an easier time organizing themselves and rebelling. Before, the people were being hit mostly were in the countryside, where the organizational level and the visibility of the violations is not so big because there are smaller groups. They're dispersed. that hunger doesn't hit them at the same time. But they have been chronically exploited over the last 40, 50 years. Now the situation, due to decision of the governments, it was their decisions and of the IFIs to leave to the market the guarantee of food security for the people. They said, dismantle national agriculture, reduce investments in small farmers throughout the developing world, stop with support to small farmers by the national governments through structural adjustments and renegotiation of debt, imposing on most of the southern governments these types of extra, what's called structural adjustments, PRSPs, on whatever. And then, on top of that, they said, eliminate stocks and the market will take care of you. And what happened? The market did not take care of anybody, because it doesn't take care of anybody. The market is not interested in people. The market is interested in making profits. What the banks are making is asking people to invest in the futures market to make a buck. Banks are making 20, 30% of profit a year investing in the futures market of commodities. This is how the market takes care of the food security of the population. And now what we are seeing, and what really worried them, and if you read the CFA, the famous comprehensive framework of action, elaborated by the UN high-level task force on the crisis, you will see two worries there. First, and these to me are the real causes for the crisis. The first is that the CFA identifies that the instability, the social riots, the people rebelling, leads governments to be demoted. And we are seeing a bunch of them falling right now. And this is worrisome for the governments. It's not because people are going hungry. It's because the governments are being changed. And the second one is that people were worried, and the governments were worried because for a long time, and he mentioned some, the government started saying, we do not trust in the market anymore. We want to find our own solutions. And they started land grabbing, they started doing this and doing that, and they said maybe it's not so good to finish the Doha round. Maybe this stuff about liberalization of the market is not so interesting. And this is clearly spelled out in the CFA. They were worried about the lack of trust that governments started spelling out on the market liberalization process. And this is worrisome to governments as well, not that people are going hungry. So what we understand is that the present situation is a chronic situation of violations of human rights, including the right to adequate food, but also other economic, social, and cultural rights, enormous violence against human rights defenders, arraigned against the people, so violations of related civil and political rights. And this is what the crisis is all about. I think land grab is just a name for huge land grab that has been going on in our countries and throughout the world. Throughout, the only different thing now is what he mentioned, that governments are land grabbing in other countries and maybe not even taking care of their own investments because it's cheaper to invest in countries where we don't have rule of law, where there is no protection of the environment, where there is no protection of labor laws, where there is no protection of anything, and where the elites are very open to these kind of deals without any kind of accountability. But this is the biggest difference, where Davao, for instance, goes into Madagascar and has a lease of half of the arable land of the country for 99 years without a dime to pay. And there is an interest there. South Korean government, together with Davao, together with the Madagascar government, the government itself. Okay, but the deals continue under different formats right now. So, the third issue that I would like to point out to is the question, of enormous violence against women. There is a total silence about the violence against women, the brutal violence against women. I'm a medical doctor. I've been working with nutrition all my life. I became a human rights defender because I didn't find in medicine a cure for anything, as I didn't find in politics sometimes. And I went to the human rights because I thought that only joining the struggles of the people, we can change things. And I think we have not seen the enormous violence that's committed against women in the most basic thing, their right to control their own lives, their right to control their own bodies. And India is one of the countries where this happens most. I don't know, you probably know, many people know here, that about 50% of the marriages that go on in India are child marriages, in women below age 18, when they are not ready to be a mother, when they are forced to be a mother, and they are disputing with their own kid the food that they eat. That means that they don't have the right to control their life, and their kid suffers from that, and they also suffer from that. And most of the infant mortality is caused by adolescent births. So when the mother is still growing, she's still, and the rate of maternal death is enormous. So there's an enormous combination here of violence in terms of not access to inheritance, not access to land, not rights to anything, but also not control over their own body that is seen as a resource by society and is treated sometimes as a bargaining deal between families. This is tragic. It's a problem all over the world, even in India. And to conclude, I would like to say that we in the human rights field are appalled right now by something that's going on in the field of human rights in this John Ruggie report. I don't know if you have read about that, but the UN Secretary General designated a special representative that is called on the business in human rights. The idea was that he should write a report telling how governments should regulate or should interfere with business in order to guarantee human rights. Basically, John Ruggie has produced one of the worst possible reports in the world, totally submissive to the interests of the corporations. He's been totally, he's been praised by every single corporation in the world, where he says that corporations should self-regulate themselves. There is no possibility of asking, the devil to self-regulate himself or herself, depending on the point of view. He, Ruggie, is not accountable, at this point to the human rights system of the United Nations. He's really accountable to the private sector. And he's going to present his report in June to the Human Rights Council. And from what we got, the information, it's possible that it will be approved. And in his report, he denounces any possibility of governments and the UN or public regulation of the private sector. In this situation that we're living now, where we have a rampant land grab led by governments and private sector, this can be really dangerous. And I think you know that in India, what the SCZs and what the transferring of land to the private sector is doing in terms of dispossessing people. Imagine that at a global level without any kind of control, any kind of possible regulation. So I think we really need to unite. We are a human rights organization at the service of the social movements. We will continue to do this work, but we need to build alliances, strong alliances, because I really believe that without our alliance, the other mechanisms will not work. Thank you very much.